But thank you so much for staying with us. Now, crude oil prices slipped earlier today as ample global supplies of sets concern about the impact of oil flows from the U.S. capture of President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, home of the biggest global oil reserves. Brent crude futures went down 23 cents, about 0.4%, to $60.52 a barrel. That's about 940 GMT, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude is 21 cents, to 0.4% lower at $57.11 per barrel. The benchmark were volatile in early Asian trades as investors assess the situation in Venezuela, an OPEC member whose crude exports had been under a U.S. embargo, and the potential impact on oil supply. U.S. President Donald Trump said Washington would take control of the country and that the embargo remains in place. After Maduro was detained in New York on Sunday, we've seen the global market with plentiful oil supplies. Analysts said any further disruption to Venezuela's exports would have little impact on prices. Oil output in the country has plummeted in recent decades amid mismanagement and lack of investment from foreign firms after Venezuelan national oil operations in the 2000s. Well, let's take the other half of this conversation to look at developments in the global oil space. My guest is Dr. Chinan Dikwal. He's the Vice Chairman, African Energy Council. Good afternoon, Dr. Dikwal. Compliments of the season, and it's good to see you this new year.
Hi, Tolu. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, he's joining me live from Qatar. Yeah, now let's get to our conversation very quickly. Oh, you're in London at the moment. I beg your pardon. Yeah, all right, thank you so much. Yeah, I hear that you're in London at the moment. All right then, now I'm looking at this situation and of course what we see today with regards to crude oil prices. Let me break that down to you. Brent is down about 23 cents. U.S. West Texas is also down. Generally, what do you make of this? And what do you think is responsible for that, the development in Venezuela with that large deposit of oil and they still suffer this much?
Thanks, Tolu. So I think when you look at the market, you see a couple of things. There's a huge amount of confusion. Okay, confusion because many analysts, many traders are trying to price what's just happened into the price of Brent or WTI. But people are not quite sure. It's not very clear.
Apologies, Dr. Dikwal. Just 1 minute. We have some live pictures now where the FCT minister is visiting Ogubolo local government in Rivers State. Will be joining now for the live pictures, live from that event. TVC News, we can continue to watch Business Nigeria on all other platforms. Yes, and also scan the QR code on your screen and continue watching all other platforms. TVC News program goes on live. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dikwal. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I can go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just making the point that, when you look at the situation right now, it's a bit complex because many analysts are trying to make sense of what is really happening. People are trying to price this event in, but it's a very complex one because people are not clear of exactly what it is. And I'll describe this. Tolu, in any circumstance, if the president of an OPEC country is abducted or kidnapped in the way that it has happened right now, then I can assure you that what you would see is that there will be an upward pressure on price. So generally, the price of crude oil should go up in normal circumstances. In this particular circumstance, the price of oil is going down. And there are two reasons why that's the case, that the price is going down. And one of them is very quickly is people are not entirely sure about what the impact of the United States taking over Venezuela and running it will be. Yes, President Donald Trump has made it very clear that the U.S. are going to run Venezuela, to run it entirely, to get as much oil from the ground. Even paraphrasing what he said, he's mentioned that they will increase production. So many people recognize that, and I think it's quite clear. But what's not super clear is what will happen in the short term. Now, bear in mind, to your point there, yes, Venezuela has 17 billion barrels of oil reserve, one of the biggest ones. It's called 300 billion barrels of crude oil, one of the biggest in the world, 17% actually of global proven oil reserves, yes. But don't forget, Tolu, in the 1970s, Venezuela was producing about 3.5 million barrels per day. Today, from 3.5, it's gone down to about 800,000. So there's been a real decline over the period of time. So even though it's an OPEC member, its production has gone down quite a lot. Now, if President Donald Trump comes and says we're going to increase production in the short term, I can tell you this for a fact. Increasing production is not that easy because the infrastructure in the last couple of years has been decaying a lot. Right? Been decaying. Refineries perhaps do not work. Maybe you even need to build new refineries. So there's several things that need to come into play. A lot of investment that needs to be made first before you can see an uptick in production. So again, long term, can certainly see that this would have downward pressure on price. In the short term, honestly, it's not very clear. It's not clear as well because they're still under sanctions. Until the US make it clear whether the sanctions are off or it's on, and I know for now they're saying it's on, but if that changes, then I can assure you that the price of oil would go up very, very quickly. But for now, they're keeping a lid on it. So short term, it's not entirely clear. I think longer term, it's much clearer to us because they will put on additional barrels. In fact, I'll say this to you. Many analysts are forecasting that from 800,000 in the next couple of years. So I'll say probably in about a year and a half, I expect that the production of Venezuela can probably hit around 1.3, maybe 1.2 million barrels per day in about a year from now. Potentially, just given architecture that we know, it can go up that much. But in the next 4 years, probably 5 years, then it's possible they might get to about 2 million barrels, maybe even more, 2.5 million barrels. Now, if those new barrels come into the market, then I can assure you it would be in an oversupplied market and the pressure on price will be downward. So anything you're looking at right now in terms of futures forecast of price, you should start to price in some sort of a downward pressure on price.
Mm. Well, interesting stuff and interesting days really ahead. But for me, I would also want to ask you generally that you've talked about the impact on prices, and some say it might not have, or it might have little or immediate impact on pricing. But analysts are also warning of Iran's reaction after President Trump's threat. Do you think that could also impact the totality of the market?
Absolutely. I think that could be something again that, this well could really change the circumstance. If we start to see an escalation of conflict around Iran, then honestly expect to start to see that demand in Iran might start to come under pressure and price will go up. The reason for that is twofold. A lot of the crude oil from Iran ends up in China. I can't remember the number. I think it's a minimum, I think about 60%, 70% crude oil from Iran goes into China. So China is the one absorbing a lot. If those supply chains are affected, then you can expect that all of a sudden, the price of crude would go up very, very significantly. And we have seen this rhetoric. We've heard this rhetoric. Donald Trump has made this threat. He's made two of them. He made threats. He's made two of them. I think there's several flashpoints. Iran is one to look out for, I think, in the very short term. But I'll also say this, that Greenland is another one to look at, because if you listen to Donald Trump's he's also been ratcheting it up around Greenland, taking it over. Maybe that would not be a direct confrontation, as it were, but something, again, to pay very close attention to. I think these things, if they come onto the market, then I do think that you see an upward pressure on price. But say this, Tolu as well. Bear in mind, Donald Trump ran on an America First agenda. He ran on bringing prosperity back to the ordinary people in the United States of America. Inflation has not helped. Inflation has been ticking up, for a long time over the period of his time. Yes, it's starting to come up. But one of the key things for him, I think, is he wants to maintain the price of oil in a very low sort of point. Just because when oil is low, then general inflation for a lot of goods and services, headline inflation, comes down because a lot of goods and services depend on the price of energy. So when the price of oil is low, then so you can certainly see that for Venezuela, you can see the strategic play. In the medium term, perhaps the game there, it can push it up as much as possible so that it would have an impact on the price of goods and services and ultimately inflation. But I do think that if they go into Iran, it could have the opposite effect, where that disruption could lead to an increase in global oil price, leading global oil price ultimately would translate to an increase in inflation.
Hmm. I'm seeing that story as a home of the biggest oil reserves now becoming almost a shadow of itself, considering all of these challenges that we see. But moving forward, I would still like you generally to take us through that global oil market space. What do you think will be shaping prices, supply issues in 2026?
So I'll answer that. I'll answer that in a moment. But can I also just to the point I was making earlier? I think what many people need to recognize is Venezuela in the 1970s, 1980s was a massive powerhouse. I think at some point it was producing about 7% of global oil, global oil output. Okay, that has changed so much, particularly in 2007, when Hugo Chavez in 2007 gave the ultimatum to many oil companies to say you should reduce your equity stake in a lot of the oil blocks, or else you'll be nationalized. When he made that threat, many Western companies pulled out. So I'll give you an example. I think ExxonMobil left in 2007, I think. Equinor left much later, I think 2021. I mean, several companies, Phillips left in 2007. Several Western companies left. Only players that stayed and are still there are companies like Chevron. Even Chevron, their production is very low. I think it's about 200,000 barrels a day. So Chevron is still there in a very small capacity. I think Morel Proms, the French company, is still there in a very small capacity. I think Repsol is still there, and Eni. These are the small Western companies that are still there, but all in a very skeletal way. Other players that are there are CNPC, the Chinese, the Russians. It used to be Rosneft, I think, but that's been moved on to a different entity, I think, right now, and also the Indians, ONGC. The reason why I'm putting this up is so that people can understand it. For when you're looking from a geopolitical standpoint for Donald Trump, yes, it's about crude oil, but it's also about squeezing the competition. China and Russia are there. It's about trying to control that narrative and control the resources from that standpoint. So I think that's something to really bear in mind. But to your last question there, how do I see the price of oil shaping up for this year? I think that question has largely been answered. If you look at a lot of the analysts, who are putting their predictions out, last year, 2020, the average crude oil price was approximately, I mean, you can argue, $65 per barrel, the average for the whole year. Okay. For this year, a lot of the forecasts are, sort of in the lower 50s, sorry, in the upper 50s, maybe 56, 57. So we want that to sink in. Last year, 65 roughly. This year, we're forecasting the price of Brent will go down. And the reason for that is several fronts, particularly actually Q1 and Q2. In Q1 and Q2, we expect to start to see a dip in the price of the oil price for several reasons. One, Tolu, in Q1 is generally the slowest month in the year anyways. The month where straight after the holidays, nobody's flying to go see family anymore. Everyone's focused on work and trying to recoup and all of that. People are not traveling 15 hours like you find in the UK, in the US and all of that to go and visit family. So it's generally a quiet month. Because of that, there's no huge demand on crude oil. So that's one. But number two, we are currently in an oversupply market. They've noticed market already put it out that they have, in December and November of last year, OPEC said they'll maintain until April of 2026. So we're already in an oversupplied market. So because of the oversupply, any additional barrels that you put onto the market, you make it worse for price. So I do think Q1 and Q2 will be a very challenged month, if you ask me, for the price of crude oil. Brent. I think as we go into Q3 and Q4, perhaps things could start to pick up. But if I was a betting man, I will not put the price of crude oil for this year, above sort of $60, $61 per barrel. I think that's sort of a fair point for the price of crude for this year.
So it looks like, would you say our budget projection in Nigeria was conservative enough? Or what do you think of putting our projections at $64, around about that for our oil output for 2026, and also 1.8 million barrels per day?
Correct. So I think that was too ambitious, if you ask me. Ambitious, and I think I told you and I, through 2025, we spoke about this lot. And I keep saying, I'm hoping that Minister Wale Edun is listening and he fully understands the fact that, our budget forecast needs to match, it needs to be realistic so that we don't keep going to the market to borrow. And you saw that last year. I think around September, I can't remember, July actually, around July or something of that sort. By that point, we realized that we're going to run a deficit. We had to go to market to borrowing capital. Exactly your point, Cholu. This year, so last year, just for context, the budget benchmark was $75 per barrel, and the volume, crude volume, was about 2.06 million. So we're saying that we will produce 2.06 million barrels per day, comparing to the price of crude oil to be $75 per barrel. None of those were achieved. I've just said it here. The average price was about $65 per barrel. So $10 per barrel short. Not a small thing. We missed it by a massive margin. A massive margin. That's number one. Number two, even when you look at the volume that we had last year, you can argue, I haven't looked at that entirely. I'll be very surprised if it's beyond sort of a 1.6, 1.7 million barrels per day, including condensate. Okay, so again, missing it by a massive margin. So when you put those two together, you can see why we had to go to market. So the thought was that thing in 2026 for this year's budget that would make it a lot more realistic. That was the whole thinking. Make it a lot more realistic. And here we go. I think I know for a fact that the oil price for the budget was approximately $65 per barrel. You said 64, I think something like that. But I know that it went to the Senate, and the Senate pushed back. The Senate pushed back and pushed back towards $60 per barrel. I know that for a fact. And also, I think this one a lot more realistic. The volume for this year, I think we pegged it around 1.84 million barrels per day. And I think that's a lot more realistic. If we ended at 1.6, just given my knowledge of a lot of the projects that are potentially going to come onto the market, I think there's a possibility that 1.8 could be realistic, or we could come close to it. But certainly, I think it would be a big mistake again if we were to miss that mark, miss the mark again in terms of a forecasting standpoint and have to go to borrow. I think that would be very disappointing.
Dr. Chinandi Kwalamos, thank you so much as always for joining the program. We really appreciate this, and I wish you a great 2026. Vice Chair, African Energy Council, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks very much.